Hlekani bakokwani. Greetings from Musoni. Tukulu wabangoni ni bandao. I'm at the Sahel Island.
Yes.
And finally, the famine Stella. We've been climbing up, and let's get to it. Let's see what it's about. All right, so there's a bit of information about it. We have Kanum, Satet, and Anuket. These are the Neteru. And the famine stela, basically the fascinating text of the stela carved on the face of the granite boulder on Sahel Island, tells the story of a nation in crisis. Its concerned king, who is Josa at the time, from the 3rd dynasty, and his efforts to find a solution, although it was composed and carved in the Ptolemaic period. The events are set around 2,500 years earlier. Famine stela is inscribed in 32 vertical rows in hieroglyphic script, with a scene above it depicting King Josa from 2686 BC. Yeah, that's about almost 5,000 years now. Presenting offering to the divine triad of Elephantine. Elephantine is the area where we are. Today is called Aswan, consisting of Neteru, Kanum, and his wife Satet, and their daughter Enuket. The country is gripped in 7 years of drought and famine. King Josa summons his famous courtier, the wise Imhotep. I'm sure this story is going to sound very familiar to all you Christians. To find a solution, Imhotep told the king that the inundation came from the sacred spring in Elephantine Island, whose Neteru Kanum was the one who controlled the flow of the water. Then Josa dutifully made offerings to the Neteru of Elephantine, and Kanum appeared to him in a dream one night, promising him to end the famine by returning the flood. To celebrate the return of the prosperity, Josa built a temple on Elephantine to thank Kanum. So this is the original inscription on the famine stela. And this basically is where the Bible writers got the story of Joseph dreaming and the 7 years of famine and yeah. So the topic of discussion today is part 2 of the order of kingship in Africa. In part 1, we debunked this very myth that claims that the lion being king of the jungle is a European concept. In Africa, the leopard is the king. We've dealt with that to show that it's a complete fallacy. So today we're going to debunk one last myth, and that is the myth that kingship comes through primarily it's what's this by birthright. I'm gonna put it into context and explain where birthright actually comes in, because it does form part of it, but birthright was never it's actually overrated in the way people interpret kingship, because obviously we're dealing with a bastardized version of the concept. In this text by it's called Muntu wa Nzambi by Chilemalema Mukenge, it says the journey of consecration. The Luba culture values legitimate marriage and marriage stability, wealth, achievement through personal hard work and winning the race of the chieftaincy. So bear in mind, winning the race of kingship. In each case, if the ancestors are pleased with the accomplishments, they will call the achiever to seek spiritual anointing, consecration from an authorized, established achiever in the same domain. And in that case, the spiritual anointing consecration will obviously come from the priesthood, as I stated. A community builder as a husband and father of many healthy children and a contributor of a significant growth of the extended family, he would be called to be consecrated as an accomplished achiever of wealth. Mukola, a peer of past achievers, living and dead. These are people who have set the bar high. Procuring many wives for self and relatives was the most praised and accomplishment, qualifying one to run for the chieftaincy or the kingship. The race was a long and costly process. Finally, victorious for this long and costly competition for the chiefdom throne or the kingdom throne, he was invested as chief or king, mfumu, in Chiluba, and in Xitsonga, mufumi. So that was just one example to show that the concept of kingship, the ancient order of kingship, was not just birthright qualifies you. You had to run the race and prove yourself amongst all the contenders and come out the best among all the contenders. And you were not only compared to the contenders within your community, you were compared to all the forerunners before the king before you. Now, why am I saying this while standing here? We are looking at the feminine stela that refers to King Josa of the third dynasty. So when we look at ancient African kingdoms, we speak of dynasties. What is a dynasty? A dynasty is a family. So if I start as the first king, then you have the Shabangu dynasty, the Ngwane dynasty, up until, let's say it will be myself, and then my son maintains that order, and my grandson and my great-grandson. So now, how do you have the second dynasty? Is when my great-grandson loses the race to a man from another family. So that means the next king will not be of royal blood, as people always overrate this royal blood thing. When you look at professions in ancient Africa, people would follow their father's profession because it was artisanship. You would be trained from a very young age to do what your father does. So in the same manner, because essentially if my father is a carpenter, I'm likely to, or he comes from the best carpenters in the community, I'm most likely to be the next generation of the best carpenters in the community. And likewise the kingship, because the king, if you are a son of a king, you had a better chance of winning the race, hence it stayed in the family. But it would obviously, when that specific family loses grip of the race and they lose the race, then obviously then the kingship would be handed over to another family, hence the second, third, fourth, fifth dynasty. And when we speak of ancient Kemet, we speak even of the 25th dynasty. So that's about 20 families down the line. So it means every first king from each dynasty that follows is not born of royal blood. That was to ensure that the level of excellence was maintained in the kingship. Because if it was just what people are following today, just because you are born of royal blood, then would have mediocrity, weak kings continuing to take the throne just because they are kings. Or rather, just because they are born of royal blood. You know what I'm saying? This is the reason why in the skeletal remains, the king of Amazulu is required to kill a lion. That is the last part of the race to prove yourself as a king, as worthy of the throne. The last part as contending for the throne or running that race would be killing a lion, because in the pride, how does a lion become king? By killing the lion which is king of that specific pride. And so if you're gonna be Ngonyama, you must do what the Ngonyama in the field does by killing a lion. So we can see that when we follow the ancient African order of kingship, it does not just start with kings. It just starts basically with ordinary citizens. For a boy to become a man, there was a long race towards manhood, and the standard was very high. If you look at the Maasai community today, an average man is required at the end of the race towards manhood to kill a lion with a spear, which is something now only required for a king in the Amazulu monarch, which obviously is only a skeletal remain. We no longer have legitimate kingships. So, in the Maasai, when I was in Zanzibar, my Maasai brothers and friends that I was hanging out with told me something very interesting. And they said that if you have not killed a lion, the girls in the Maasai, no Maasai girl is going to agree for you to marry them because you have not finished the race of manhood. As we can see even from Muntu wa Zambi, the standard is very high in ancient African culture. So when we really compare that to how we live today, the standard was too high. We live in a very soft generation because children are no longer trained, they're just raised. But back in the days, children were trained from a very young age to become kings, to become whatever profession they are going to take after. They would start from a very young age. So they did not spend time just playing in the streets. There was a high standard required from them that even by up until to the age of 12, one could become a king and a pharaoh, just as King Tutankhamun took the throne from a very young age. It takes training from the early stages to be able to reach that level. So that basically kills this whole overrating of bloodline, that if someone is born of blood, they are therefore have the right to be king. It does not work like that. It's just that when your father was king, you had a better chance to win that race against other contenders who did not have the privilege of a father who would train them to be king. But then you have those who have the spiritual calling from the ancestors, because at the end of the day, what marks your kingship was a calling from the ancestors, a spiritual calling. Kingship was a calling. Fatherhood was a calling in ancient African systems. So even though someone did not come from that bloodline, so at the end of the day, the calling is the one that makes you king, not your birthright, as people put it. It's just that with your calling, you can come through a king, but with your calling, you can displace the current dynasty if that specific son that follows is not chosen by the ancestors. And the person that would determine and would communicate who the ancestors had chosen is the priesthood, Imboni, which I have explained in part 1. That's it from me, Musoni. Tukuluwa bangonini bandawu. Peace and Bantu power.